afternoon.
Good morning.
How are y'all?
Doing
Fantastic.
great.
I am really looking forward to this conversation because every time I talk to y'all, y'all say something really smart. So I'm excited to learn from you today. Hi, everybody out there. My name is Amasa Troutman. I live in Memphis, Tennessee, on the homeland of the Chickasaw Nation. I'm a storyteller and a cultural strategist, and the founder and runner of a whole bunch of things we won't go through right now. Um, but we want to talk about today is really as the work of justice for Black people grows and grows and grows exponentially in the moment that we're in. A lot of us are spending a lot of time thinking about what it means to reimagine our communities, right? Like, what do we do beyond the work of justice? How do we make sure that when that work is done, we actually have safe, joyful, abundant spaces for our folks to live in? And so a lot of us are turning towards community development, right? And we're working really based on the premise that holistically justice must include a conversation about economics and access to capital and access to land, right? Acknowledging the complexities of talking about access to land in a nation that is built on stolen land, but the conversation still must be had. On April 4th, 1967, in his Beyond Vietnam speech in New York City, King made it very clear to us in order for justice to be realized, we have to go beyond race and talk about race, class, and militarism. And many of us have turned to the work of neighborhood-based economic development to be able to realize that conversation in our lifetime. And Aaron Williams and Leona Varnell and I are three such individuals. And today we're going to have a conversation about what it means to build back Black, because it's just different for us, right? I want to start by allowing y'all space to introduce yourselves and your work, and then I'll do a little bit of the same, and then we can get into it with some questions and have a really awesome, transformative, life-changing conversation. Okay? Awesome. Aaron, will you grace us with your voice and tell us all about yourself and your work?
Yes, good morning for 30 more minutes. My name is Aaron Williams, and I am calling in from St. Louis, Missouri. I am a community builder for the Ville neighborhood of St. Louis, one of our many historic African American communities in the United States. And what I mean when I say I'm a community builder is I actually sit in a lot of different places within the community. So I'm the board chairman for the Ville, which is the organization I'm representing today. For the Ville is a community-based tourism and arts organization that seeks to use tourism and arts to catalyze economic development in the Ville neighborhood. I'm also a board member for Northside Community Housing in the Ville, which is an affordable housing developer and community development corporation in the Ville neighborhood. So you'll see I'm trying to use the synergy between those things to rebuild this community. And then I also serve as the co-chair for the Ville Collaborative, which is sort of like a neighborhood association for the community. So I stretch myself because I know that it takes the integration of all of those systems to really save and bring back our historic Black communities.
It makes me feel good. Thank you. Luana, tell us about you.
Good afternoon, morning, whatever, everybody. It's Leona Varnell again. You're seeing my face. I'm filling in for, you saw a video just earlier with Reverend Robert Turner of Vernon AME in Greenwood, Oklahoma, Tulsa, Oklahoma. Just so you know, that building he was in is the only surviving edifice of the massacre that we heard so much about yesterday from Hannibal Johnson and from Dr. Cobb. And you also saw the short video today on the PBS special. I'm filling in because I also have multiple roles in an historic African-American neighborhood. You may be aware that Reverend Turner is the president of the de novo Greenwood Main Street that they're building. I happen to be the executive director of the Main Street program in Atlanta, Sweet Auburn Works. We're the Main Street program for the historic Sweet Auburn neighborhood. And like Aaron and Reverend Turner, I also am in the executive leadership of a stalwart 40-plus-year-old organization in Atlanta, Historic District Development Corporation, that is the CDC. It's a landowning stakeholder in the neighborhood that does redevelopment on the residential and commercial side, to make sure that we retain the tone and tenor of this historic neighborhood and build back Black with our land and our buildings. With that, and I think that's enough for me for now. Anasa, get us going, because we got a lot to say. I'm excited.
Yeah, so I'm doing very similar work to both of you, but here in Memphis. I actually, interestingly enough, for folks who saw the last conversation, am the steward of a historic preservation project in Memphis, a building that's called Historic Claiborne Temple, which is the organizing headquarters for the 1968 sanitation worker strike, where the I Am a Man signed and became famous. And it's been really interesting for me because I am an artist, I'm a producer and a storyteller, and really I think about culture all I ever think about is culture and how are we shifting culture. And at some point I got to a point when I was like, I mean, the stories are really important, but to what end? And what is it I actually want to shift the culture of? And really started to think about how I can direct my work towards shifting the culture, the economy in the South. And thinking that if we can do that, then pretty much the rest of America is going to be taken care of. And because I think of St. Louis as the North-South, then you're in that conversation too, Aaron. So I really want to talk to you all about why you're doing this, because this is not a thing that people do, right? There are more and more of us, but it's like when I'm like, oh yeah, I'm a developer now, people look at me funny. When I'm like, that's how I'm approaching justice from the point of a real estate development. And so I'm curious about why, what made you make the leap? Because I know y'all weren't born as real estate developers.
Let me start. I'll set a tone that I think is really important for our audience to just, we'll start on the same footing. Anasa, you and I have said many times that when you think about real estate development and you think about African American communities, the first thing I like to tell people is highest and best use of land and buildings means different things to different cultures, different people, different owners.
That's right.
Our highest and best use does not always fit the market for capital, the market for the development community. Our highest and best use can mean making sure our residents have an affordable place to live. Our highest and best use might mean making sure that our business owners can get a commercial space in our neighborhoods and not spend $1,600 a square foot. $30 a square foot is too much oftentimes. Our highest and best use means making sure there's access to creative opportunities in our neighborhoods, performance venues, using our real estate to enhance the neighborhood and not oftentimes extract from it. So let's start from that, from that foundation and move forward. Me contributing my skill set and efforts to the revitalization, the continued revitalization of an African American neighborhood, is just that I'm a proud African American man. I'm from Jackson, Mississippi. We are a resilient Black community that believes in growing and building on behalf of our community, not leaving anyone behind, growing together. And in this environment, real estate matters and real estate is important. And the only way to begin to preserve, capture, and leave as a foundation for the future your cultural heritage is through the building, the land, and the growth of the two, that your heritage happened, to be able to tell those stories and be able to build from those stories. I'll stop talking from there. And Aaron.
Well, a lot of what I'm going to say is going to sound like an echo of Leona. So I too am a product of a historically Black community in Kansas City. So I was educated and raised in the 18th and Vine district of Kansas City, Missouri. The Kansas City Monarchs baseball field was right behind my high school. So we were immersed in that history and in that culture. All of the students in our school were taught that history. So when I came to St. Louis for university and I learned about the Ville, I was like, man, it's no coincidence that there's the same neighborhood as in another city. But what's peculiar about St. Louis is, like you already said, Anasa, it's the South. It has a very special type of racism. It escaped that whole decade of atonement that I felt like the South had to sort of deal with. It just kind of flew under the radar, and we're still dealing with issues. That's why we have our Mike Brown. But that's why St. Louis is the home of Pruitt Igoe. That's why the St. Louis is the home of Harlan Bartholomew, the guy who almost wrote the rules for urban renewal. This is St. Louis, and there's this community there called the Ville that is much more historic than the place that I grew up in. But it is often ignored, and I believe that is ignored because it doesn't have any economic power. So people can point to it and they can extract from it the cultural legacy, but as far as the place as it exists now, they just let it deteriorate. And I decided to not even create anything myself. I just started piecing together the things that were already there. And I said, how can we leverage these things to claim back power and use them to really build tools of self-sustainability? And all of that is centered around economics. I don't want to continue just building affordable housing. We need to flip this, right, and make it work for us. And we need to reclaim our cultural legacy. And all of that comes back to economics. And I'm not talking about the type of economics that we're used to hearing, like prosperity gospel or, putting your identity under LLC, all those things you typically hear. No, this is, I'm talking about like community economic power. When a new developer shows up or a new business person shows up, they know who they need to speak with because they have ownership in the land and they also have influence over the politics of that space. So that's what I seek to do.
Mm-hmm. I love that you said that, because when I think about this work, I think about words like cooperative economics and community ownership. And I think that one of the challenges when you're working in economics is that people make an assumption about what you mean by that, right? And when we're doing this work, we're not talking about building economic power in the traditional sense of hyper-capitalist American economics, right? We're talking about a more holistic, collaborative, cooperative economics. And I am curious about how you integrate those things into the way you build your work, so that the communities that you're working with can learn and grow in those ways, as opposed to, every town has the Black developer who is doing the things that all the other developers are doing and gentrifying and all that, right? So how are you avoiding that kind of practice and making sure that folks are actually participating in a way that is about broad community ownership and the lifting of all the boats?
I'm going to cheat, Anasa. Well, that's the Sweet Arbor community is a blessed community in the sense that greater than 50% of the land, addressable land and buildings, are still owned by, I'm going to use the word, an empathetic owner, which happen to be African American institutions, most of them nonprofit, who have the desire to use this land for purposes that benefit the community. That's our cheat. That's our community ethos. And so I don't have to reorient a market-based developer to want to do the things that are bubbling up from the community. When we go out and do community engagement, what our neighborhood's asking for, I actually have landowners who, I'll use the language of empathy again, who are empathetic to understanding why these old buildings are important to our cultural heritage, why this land is important to hold on to, why it represents 170 plus years of African American resilience and excellence across commerce and civil rights and social justice. So that's the key, is finding the group who's interested in maintaining the ethos of the culture of the neighborhood. now that I've described the cheat, I'm going to, the next part of this conversation, hopefully we'll go to how then do we find empathetic capital who understands our needs, who could then take my owners and push them forward. So I'm going to mute myself. And Aaron, I want to hear your thoughts.
Let's hear from Aaron.
So honestly, I can't say that we have found that empathetic capital yet. On the Northside Community Housing side, we live and die by the Community Development Administration funding cycles, the low-income housing tax credit funding cycles. We're just a nonprofit developer. And we're doing something important in providing affordable housing for our community members and also preserving some of the historic housing stock in the neighborhood, but we still have not found that empathetic dollar. Yeah, I know it exists, right? There's social impact capital and all those things, but operating in the distressed market like we do, it's still difficult to figure out how to make that work. But a kind of irony and benefit that the Ville has is that a lot of its legacy is rooted in institutions, which means that city government owns a lot of the land in the community. It's not privately owned at the moment. The Ville has one of the highest concentrations of vacancy in the city of St. Louis. What that means is our first move is different. It's more politics, right? How do we get the city to a point where they recognize that before we enable anybody to do anything in this place, we need to talk to these people first. That's where we're at. And that becomes more of an indirect or a soft ownership of land and place that we hope will transition to like real ownership over time. But right now it's mostly political. It's about building your political chips up so that we can work with the city to revitalize this community.
I want to go back to the conversation about economics, but I think, Aaron, you this whole conversation, you've been propelling us forward because that's actually a huge question for me. Because we're not developing land for the sake of developing land. We're not developing culture for the sake of developing culture. There is a conversation here about power, right? There's a conversation about cultural and narrative power, who gets to tell the story and to whom are we telling. There's a conversation about political power and, of course, economic power. And I am curious about how you all are being intentional, or are you yet to the point where you can be intentional about leveraging the community that you're building and the work that you're doing for economic, cultural, and political power?
Can you restate the question? It was dense. I'm just trying to make sure I got it.
I mean, that's what I do, Aaron. I mean, I think, for me, like, again, my pathway here to this work, to being a developer and to thinking about community development wasn't just because I wanted to be a real estate developer. I have absolutely no interest in real estate development, right? For me, it was a means to an end because I understand that in order to build wealth in America, you must be investing in land and you must be investing in entrepreneurship, right? Which leads us, we'll get back to the question of like understanding that both of those things require capital, and African Americans have historically been denied access to capital. How do you build wealth, land-based wealth, when you don't have access to capital, right? We're going to get there, but I also know that we're doing this because we want power, because we want our communities to be safe. We want them to experience abundance. We want them to experience joy. And in order to do that, we have to have sovereignty and control over our own destiny, which means we have to have power, and not in that like mega, right, like egoic kind of power, but like real, true power that comes from the spirit and comes from community. And I'm wondering how that translates through your work, because I know the mechanics of your work, right? Like we know what that looks like, but how do you get to the so what part? How do you translate into the power, the community building, the joy, the narrative, the storytelling? Like, how does that actually work for folks who are curious and don't know how to get there in their own communities?
Anasa, I wanted to give Aaron some time to respond. I wanted him to respond first the first time, but you hit it on the head. It's about charting your own path and being in control of your own destiny. It's some of the trauma of this past century. Let's go back to it's been 100 years since 1919 to 1921, and the wholesale inability of our neighborhoods to be able to chart their own path and growth for, say, the last 50 years, with the vast majority of our urban environments. You know what they say, if you wake up, if you wake up in the morning and all you're trying to do is feed yourself and shelter yourself and educate your kids, it makes it very difficult to think about, you know, the better stuff of being able to chart your own destiny and plan for your future. And I think collectively there's been that challenge for all the things that I can tell you that the Sweet Harbor community cheats on in being able to hang on to this land. I will not tell you that it has been easy for these institutions to be able to hang on to their land. I will also not tell you that it has been easy for us to be able to chart the path of our direction for finding resources to do things as simple as provide equitable infrastructure investments for our part of a city. It's interesting to me that we rarely have a conversation about the idea that these neighborhoods are not on Mars. These neighborhoods are part of large municipalities that technically, you know, are they receive taxes. They technically are supposed to fix sidewalks and street lamps when they're out and provide public safety in places that they should. And yet we find ourselves fighting and wrestling and cajoling just to get an equitable share of being a part of this whole. Not to mention the idea that for those of us who endeavor to do this private real estate development, this private development, this ability to use our land for our benefit, we then have to, again, out of our control, cajole an entire market of investable funds or loanable funds that are the key tool for extracting value and extracting a purposeful intent out of the land that we own. We were recently on a panel in Atlanta here, working with and attempting to bring some perspective to impact capital providers who were interested in finding out what it is that African Americans want to do with their land in downtown Atlanta, and why it requires a subsidy for us to solve a lot of the problems we want to with our land, and why it's not just the development itself, but it's so many of the wraparound services and the programming that we feel are important to the upliftment of our neighborhood. So let's use simple math. If we don't have the municipal resources to solve some of our social problems, then we'll have to find it somewhere else. And oftentimes in the physical space where we bring solutions to our neighborhoods, we also have to have places to educate our entrepreneurs, places to provide culturally significant and culturally competent programming for our children. These things all require money, and they all require, and they all happen in the spaces that we develop. And so how do you begin to orient capital to think about it's not just the building, it's also these services that are needed here, because we're building for a community, not for luxury condos and luxury apartments. We're not extracting value, we're keeping it in the neighborhood. I'm gonna stop talking again, and Aaron, want to hear your thoughts.
All right, I don't know if I have a direct answer, so I might ramble a little bit here. So the first thing that I am very intentional about is getting behind people in the community and building their power as spokespersons for what we're trying to do. What that means is identifying the resources that are out there to educate them to be policy advocates or to lift up their stories. And it also means sometimes writing for them or speaking for them when they are not comfortable, but making sure that the public understands that this is the story of Jane Doe or John Doe who lives in the Ville community of North St. Louis. And this is why you should respect them. Once their platform has grown, I don't hold on to them. I say, hey, you do what you do. Just remember, I'm always here to support you. And to be very honest, for the Ville, our board is 60% senior citizen African-American women. They'll tell you with the quickness, I don't have time. I don't have time to argue with you today or talk to you about this. I'm trying to either enjoy my retirement or I'm still trying to survive. So I spend a lot of time helping them build power. I also spend a lot of time establishing a brand and a story that can be understood across our region so that everyone can begin to envision how they fit into that story, not how they can hijack it or how they can disrupt it, how they can fit into it. So it is a lot of conversations with public officials. It is a lot of conversations with, private developers that might be doing something close by the neighborhood to show them how, this is how what you're doing connects to what we're doing. And this is why you should consider investing in us and in our mission as we try to grow this community. The best example of that right now is that For the Ville has been advocating for a cultural trail in the community now to connect all the landmarks. The purpose of that cultural trail, one, is to gain authority over land, especially along the main commercial corridor of the community, which is MLK Boulevard. If we have public infrastructure that we help develop in that area, then we can start talking about SIDs or other types of special taxing districts. Then we can start to have a say in what type of small businesses come to that main street and how we can support those small businesses. So that cultural trail, while it is a project about preservation, is also a project about economic development. We're saying this is the foundation of a new vision for the Ville community, because right now it's a distressed market. People look at it and they don't have enough creativity, or they're not influenced to think creatively enough to see it in a new light. They can only see the problems that are right there in front of them. So you have to paint the picture for them and let them know that this picture or this vision is coming from people in the community. It just didn't descend from heaven or whatever. This is a grassroots developed vision that you need to get behind. And also, we spend a lot of time bringing people to the community. And we have a hip hop 5K in the neighborhood just to make people run through the neighborhood. So it's like, oh, you're afraid of the Ville? Well, how about you run 3 miles through it and then tell me what you think about it? And they come, they enjoy themselves, and they go home thinking, wow, why haven't we done anything with this 150 acres of vacant land in this community with so much history? When those conversations start going, they develop a life of their own. But at the same time, because we put power behind people, they know who to come back to have those conversations. And if they don't, then somebody is going to, shame them. Oh, you're doing that over there without talking to such and such. You probably should talk to them first, or you might have an issue on your hand. So that's the space we're operating in right now, while we're still, doing our affordable housing development. That never stops, because housing is always a need. The demand is always higher than the supply. But there's all these soft things that happen on the other side that hopefully are preparing the community to own its narrative moving forward.
I love what you just said, and I I want to take a pause and just talk about the power of imagination and creativity in the work that we're doing, because the thing that the work that we're doing and the vision that we're manifesting literally has never existed before. And the role of the artist and the role of the imagination is to be able to imagine and manifest that which has never existed. And I would love to hear from you all your experience of the relationship between your community and your work in the imagination, and why, and if you found it's important for you, if so, how. And even for you, Aaron, you described your work as a community-based art and tourism, right? Work, and like why art is important, why the storytelling is important, how is that propelling the work that you all are doing and helping you overcome the challenges that we have that are unique to our community, like access to capital and like lack of access to basic municipal functions. How are you all using your imaginations to overcome those things? And then we're gonna wrap up because I think we're running out of time.
Well, I'll start with just from a fundamental market perspective in the development space. Everyone knows that the artist community and the LGBT community goes where no one else will go. They are always early adopters, right? But also art, especially Black art, has always been a tool, right? We're talking about Afrofuturism. The future part is important. It's always been our tool to see a new reality for ourselves. And if you're operating in a space where people don't respect the current aesthetics of a community, then you need art to help them see the new reality. And that's what we use it for. And it has two benefits. We help people see a new reality, but we also support a community that is often not supported in artists, right? For the Ville never asked artists to do anything without paying them. And we're broke. What I do is I just go find the partners who can afford to pay them. And I say, okay, come do this with me, but also you need to pay this artist who's participating in this program. So we're lifting up our artists while we're painting a new picture for our community.
Amen to all of that times two. Yes, Luana.
Aaron, you're spot on perception as reality and the tools we use to change it. So here's what we haven't said to the audience yet, guys. We are all in the middle of a creative moment that requires capital, that curates our neighborhoods, that we're using to enfranchise people, or at least to gain awareness and to bring in new investment into our neighborhoods. Aaron's Trail in Sweet Auburn, we're creating through an initiative called Sweet Auburn Walks, a hero walk that's a mile-long walk that will link what we consider to be our permanent, interesting, exciting physical moments in the neighborhood that tell a narrative about who we are and what makes us amazing. And of course, Claiborne Temple. Now, there's a greater existential conversation about why we have to do that in our neighborhoods, to import in new investment resources. Why in the video, Reverend Turner was raising so much money to revitalize the only standing edifice again from 1921 to today. It's also Black owned, we should say that as well. The only Black owned standing edifice from Greenwood. We are perpetually using our heritage to tell a story about our physical place as a method to reintroduce new capital, and I've got to go back to that word, guys, empathetic capital on our terms, because you can find capital that will want to come in and redevelop your neighborhood, that will care less about your story, will overrun your story, will erase your story. And this is a tangential conversation to our conversation around power as well, and our ability to grow with or without the capital that others needed, that others would supply us to be able to grow. I don't want to get too far down a path of all these little techniques that we have to use to reimagine our public experience. But I think the two of you also know that one of our programming strategies in Sweet Auburn Works is a public experience initiative, is trying to cultivate our police departments to enhance our public safety, is to create a lighting strategy to make sure that, as one consultant said, good lighting enhances commerce, and bad lighting enhances campers, or their ability to camp, and what we feel about that, and how we reframe that. A strategy that makes people feel comfortable running or walking through our neighborhood, that makes people want to get off at our public transit and meander through the neighborhood. These are things that we have to do to create an environment that's safe for empathetic capital to land in our neighborhoods, so we can continue to redevelop, revitalize, and create a foundation for growth on our terms. And again, it's such a broad, it's a broad conversation to be having in a short amount of time. Carmen, how much time do we have?
Yeah, I was going to say, I feel like we haven't even really started talking about the actual economic development, because it takes so much to even get there, right? And it's also hard to talk about it because you're constantly pivoting, right? It's I don't know how to even explain it, and every city, town is different. You just have to think creatively and be on your toes, and think of the best way to keep the community at the front of people's minds, really, so that, like you said, empathetic capital can land safely. Because real estate, as aggressive as it is also super cautious, conservative. They want the thing that's going to bring the return the fastest, and just helicoptering down into these communities won't necessarily bring them return the fastest, especially if they can't just mow it down and build new. So it's hard to talk about.
I find that one of the most powerful things that we've done in order to be able to attract capital is not just think about our own imagination, but actually figure out how we can leverage our imagination to inspire imagination in folks who have control over the capital. Because what I'm finding is that the ideas and the solutions and the interventions that we are creating are things that they've literally never thought of, right? And it's become part of our work to expand the imagination of folks who look at us and say, I really want to something, but it doesn't, the numbers don't work, right? Or the model doesn't work because I'm this person and this is how I see my capital coming back to me, right? And having to be able to say, well, I hear you, but what happens if we open your minds and we put this inside of it? Can you now see the vision? Are you now willing to participate in a way that feels maybe even a little uncomfortable for you, but it'll help you get something that you didn't even know that you wanted to be a part of, you
Right.
know? That's been really fascinating to me, is like how powerful that is for folks, because people who have or have the potential for empathetic capital, they want to think beyond the traditional hyper-capitalist models. They just don't know how, because literally no one has ever given them space and permission to do it. And I feel like unfortunately, part of our job is educating and inspiring those folks to see a new way, to be able to understand that they actually, this is like, the word community doesn't mean just Black people, it means community, right? And that you actually can participate as a donor or as an investor, as part of a community, everybody has a really important role to play. That doesn't mean you are more important, less important. It just means that we need to figure out how to build depth and relationship. So we need to wrap up, and I really feel like we can take a whole day and do a workshop, but I want for each of you gonna say whatever you want to say, Luana. I already know that. But I also want you to be able to have offer folks who are watching, who are thinking about getting into this work, who are having challenges. Like, I want to hear one concrete solution from you of something that you've had to break through or transform in order to push your work forward, so we can leave folks with an actual tool. And anything else you want to say? I know we're only supposed to take 5 minutes, but I want to hear what y'all got to say.
I'm going to say two things. One,
Yes.
we have some questions in the chat that we should address. But Anasa, as you were talking, I cannot not say for this audience, this concept of understanding how progressive your capital is profound. We need a study in markets, and like a system from 0 to 10. How progressive is your capital? And we're in St. Louis, are we at 6 or 7? In Atlanta, are we at, and I hate to say this, 4 or 5? And and then what work do we have to do to begin to think about, Anasa, to your terms, how you train, educate, reframe outcomes and intent of how capital serves these communities, our communities, on the terms that we need them to, for a specific set of challenges and an intended set of outcomes that we're looking for. How progressive is your capital model might be the right way to go. All right, I'm gonna stop. Do we want to, for the purposes of this panel, do we want to tackle the question? So.
Yeah, I think there's one question in particular about how and when do you go from programming to economic development is a really powerful and important question. And I'm going to just take a little privilege and just say I don't see them as different. Every bit of programming that we do is about economic development. The very first thing I did at Claiborne was produce a musical theater. Right, it was like, we're gonna do a 2-hour theater piece with a whole bunch of music and dancing, and you know what it's gonna be about? It's gonna be about economic development and dignity of humanity, and it's gonna be so dope that you're gonna be singing about economic development and writing a check at the end of it. So to me, our approach has been, we don't, like when you think, I call myself a cultural organizer, but if you go around the world, there is no line between culture, creativity, and organizing in politics, right? It is life. It is life. And that is how we hold our work, is that our stories are our goal. They are our access to develop economically. Our economic development is our future and our culture and our life. And so I would encourage you, whoever asked that question, that brilliant question, to stretch yourself to see where you can maybe blur that line a little bit. And then I'm going to allow you all to close and answer that question, and we can hop off.
So my perspective on it is that you operate in the space of projects. So once you are able to galvanize people around a project, usually through programming, that's when you start to begin to have these conversations about economic development, because then you're talking about longevity and what will still be there after everyone leaves. So you try to set up the systems that will remain once that project is complete. So for us, that's the cultural trail. For us, that's this new effort of saving Sumner High School, the first Black high school west of the Mississippi River. It's like, well, okay, we're going to talk about saving Sumner. We're not just going to talk about Sumner. We're also going to talk about what it means to the Ville and how we can improve walkability in your approach to that school. How we can improve the main street that's a block over from that school, and you start bringing in different skill sets to that conversation so that you can move toward economic development. That's my strategy. I don't know if it is the best strategy, but that's what I do.
Thank you, Aaron. We said at the outset of this conference yesterday that The work that we do comes in different forms, in different rubrics, in different models, but we all know the outcomes. We all know what the outcomes look like, and they're very similar across African American neighborhoods all across this country. To answer the question from my perspective, programming in this organization for this neighborhood is economic development. I cannot. One implies the other. One is a sufficient condition for the other, right? I could say something as easy as our iconic John Lewis mural at the corner of Jesse Hill and Auburn Avenue brings more curious people to the neighborhood who would normally maybe not run a 5K through the neighborhood, but want to get an Instagrammable moment in front of that 4-story mural representing the late Representative Lewis. Than you could ever imagine. And then we did something with American Express on the historic Atlanta Life Insurance building. It was a mothballing strategy. I had a building that the 100-plus-year-old Atlanta Life Insurance building just needed a touch up. And we worked with a local artist, Amalia Maki, who did portraits in the windows in the facade of the building of previous executives of Atlanta Life Insurance. And instead of an old building sort of turning its back on the street, now people were approaching and wondering who these executives were and taking pictures in front of it. And now you've got an opportunity to even think about how to bring in now commercial capital who would be interested in redeveloping the building. All these things, in my opinion, inform all this programming informs economic development for our landowning stakeholders, for our businesses, for our residents who are interested in seeing the neighborhood receive new interest, new capital again on our terms. That's the most important thing. And so I'll use that as a segue to Anasa's point. You know, what do you tell someone who might be interested in this work? You hear all of us very casually and seamlessly going through language of finance and real estate development and philanthropy and art and programming and culture and politics. The challenges of the African American community in the 21st century require a broad skill set. You cannot miss any of them. If you are a leader in these neighborhoods, you have to have with equal facility the ability to have conversations, substantive and meaningful conversations across all of those platforms in order to ensure that we move our communities forward in the way we want, not get left behind and not leave resources on the table. That's the thing that one should be preparing oneself to do. And if you endeavor to do this work, just get on your grimy, man. It's hard work. Learn it. Don't let anything go by. Learn the craft, learn the skills you don't know, understand why art is important to old buildings, understand what your financial tools are, understand what new markets tax credits are and historic tax credits. Understand why Aaron's talking about SIDs and CIDs and why it's important for landowners to add that little bit of tax to create some resources for your neighborhood. You have to know it all and you have to be great at it. I'll stop there.
That's a perfect place to stop. Thank y'all so much for allowing me to hold this conversation with you. I think if y'all heard nothing, the last point that Leona made is really important. If you heard Aaron at the beginning, he's like, I run an arts organization, I'm a developer, and I run the neighborhood watch or how the collaborative. Leona, we all, right? I run a foundation, an investment fund, and a production company, and a historic building. Like this holistic healing requires holistic solutions. And the moment that we stop trying to apply simple solutions to the most complex issue in the history of humanity, then that's when we're going to start winning. Like, embrace complexity, embrace partnership, embrace depth in community, embrace your fear. Your courage and your imagination are your number one and number two tools to get this work done. So just, what you say, Luana, get your Grammy on? All right, we love you. We support you. We have your back. If y'all need us, call us. I can't wait till we can be in person, because I want to have like a day-long workshop with just like the three of us going. I want to hear everything. I want to learn. I want to hear. I want to grow. So thank y'all again. Thank you again. We'll see you next time.
Thank you.
Cheers.